At best tomorrow, most places 7 or 8, about average for the time of year. But as I said, it will feel colder than it has done. Now, the rain doesn't really clear from East Anglia and the southeast, so it stays pretty damp here, even into Thursday morning. But where we do see clear skies with the colder air in place, we are going to see much more of a frost on Thursday morning, certainly in the countryside over northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Not frosty in the southeast, but it will be fairly dull and damp, I suspect, again for much of Thursday morning, perhaps turning drier through the day. Rain coming into the north during Thursday, but in between, large chunks of the country looking fine on Thursday, dry and bright with sunny spells. Again, there'll be a frosty start, but temperatures will be about average come the afternoon.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dewbs and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It is 6 p.m. Welcome to Dewbs & Co. with me, Emily Carver, standing in again for Michelle Dewberry. Now, there are a few things that have been troubling me a little bit today, so I'm going to get them off my chest, see what you think. The treatment of Kate Forbes. Kate is, of course, one of the candidates running for the SNP leadership. She is a Christian, an evangelical one at that. So it should come as no surprise that she believes in the teachings of the church to which she belongs, including that marriage is between a man and a woman, that her personal preference is not to have children out of wedlock, and that she opposes gender self-ID. Now, whether you agree or not with Forbes on these issues is, in my view, irrelevant. What is very relevant, though, is the consequent backlash, the demands that she pull out of the race, and the idea that her views are so beyond the pale that she should have no place in mainstream politics. Perhaps she was a tad naive to reveal her views. She must have seen how Tim Farron was hounded out of his role as leader of the Liberal Democrats after he kept being asked by interviewer after interviewer whether he believes gay sex to be a sin. And it looks like the same thing is happening now, even though she's made it crystal clear that she has no intention of rolling back gay marriage and that she is, in quotes, a servant of democracy. That isn't enough to appease her detractors. Is this really what we want? A country where every politician, every public figure has to sign up to some kind of purity of thinking test? I certainly do not, but let me know what you think. Have we got to a situation where no significant British political party can be led by a practicing Christian who takes their faith seriously? Then the climate emergency zealots are back and they want to bring back World War II-style rationing to help us save the planet. Yes, it's not some kind of conspiracy. British scientists have actually said it would be a good idea for governments to ration flights, petrol, household energy, meat, clothing, it goes on. Is this where we're heading? Then it's coming up to the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Last year, we gave £2.3 billion of military support. This year, Rishi Sunak plans to meet or exceed that amount. I think now would be the wrong time to dial down our support, but it also appears as though Putin is showing absolutely no signs of backing down. And at the same time, we're being told that our army is weak, depleted, and no longer a top-level fighting force. So should we continue to ramp up military support for Ukraine? And lastly, the BBC apparently thinks the way to appear more trustworthy on the television is for their reporters to look a bit scruffy. Apparently looking sweaty and dirty is best. I imagine there are many more ways the BBC could rebuild trust, and none of them include sartorial choices. But hey, do you think dressing down increases trust? All of that to come on Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. I'll be introducing my panel in just one moment. But first, let's get the latest news headlines.
Emily, thank you. Good evening. The latest GB News. US President Joe Biden says the United States will announce new sanctions against Russia this week. Joe Biden was speaking to thousands gathered in the centre of Warsaw, telling the crowds that the Ukrainian people's love of their country would prevail in the war against Russia. It follows talks he held this afternoon with the president of Poland, a day after his surprise visit to Ukraine. The two leaders addressed security issues and growing NATO's presence in Poland.
The United States and the nations of Europe do not seek to control or destroy Russia. The West was not plotting to attack Russia, as Putin said today. And millions of Russian citizens who only want to live in peace with their neighbors are not the enemy. This war is never a necessity. It's a tragedy. President Putin chose this war.
Well, earlier today, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Russia's decision to suspend its participation in a nuclear treaty is deeply unfortunate and irresponsible. Vladimir Putin made the announcement during a major State of the Nation speech in the war on Ukraine, where he also accused the West of trying to acquire limitless power. Russia has now summoned the US ambassador over what it describes as an aggressive course set by Washington.
Russia does not abandon the treaty, but suspends its participation. Before resuming the discussion of this treaty, we must first understand what do such countries of NATO, like France and Great Britain, aspire to do, and how will we take their strategic arsenals into account.
Well, in news here at home, the Royal College of Nursing says it's pausing strike action while it holds intensive talks with the government on pay. Nurses were set to walk out on March the 1st for 48 hours in their long-running dispute over jobs, pay and working conditions. But the Nurses' Union is now saying they'll meet with the Health Secretary Steve Barclay tomorrow as they begin negotiations. And the Chancellor's under pressure to improve public sector pay rises for workers after official figures showed state finances are stronger than predicted. The Office for National Statistics has revealed the government reported a monthly surplus of £5.4 billion in January. The surprising number is mainly because of self-assessed income tax. But Jeremy Hunt, who's due to set out his plans for tax and spending in the budget on March the 15th, played down the significance of the surplus to the nation's finances. Now, supermarkets are expanding the list of fruits and vegetables they'll be limiting for sale. Asda is one of the supermarkets rationing customers to a maximum of 3 items from a list of 8, which includes tomatoes, broccoli and raspberries. Morrison's will also be introducing similar restrictions from Wednesday. Bad weather across Europe and Africa is being blamed for the disruption to supply chains, with retailers warning it could last for weeks. The media regulator says it's extremely concerned by the actions of 2 particular broadcasters following comments made by Nicola Bulley's family yesterday. Both ITV and Sky News contacted the 45-year-old's relatives after her body was discovered in the wire on Sunday, despite an appeal from the family for privacy. Ofcom has now written to both companies asking them to explain themselves. The police are also being criticised over the way they've handled the case. Former Met detective Peter Bleksley told GB News earlier he does feel the investigation hasn't quite been up to scratch.
They're going to have to take a very long, hard look at how they've conducted all of this, not only the investigation, but very much the communication. And I hope that the wider British police take some lessons from all of this, because, quite frankly, if you get the messaging wrong and people don't believe you, they're not going to trust your investigations. And that, I think, is part of the reason why so many people turned up at St Michael's on wire.
Peter Bleksley, now a former Conservative MP jailed for sexually assaulting a teenager, has been freed from prison after serving only half his term. Imran Ahmed Khan was jailed for 18 months last May for groping a 15-year-old boy after a party in 2008. The 49-year-old lost a Court of Appeal challenge against his conviction and sentence in December. The UK's Chief Medical Officer has criticised the marketing of vapes. Sir Chris Whitty described them as appalling, saying it's clear some products are designed to appeal to children. Research published last July found the number of young people vaping is increasing, with many being influenced by social media. And the Princess of Wales has visited a nursing home in Berkshire today to discover how it cares for the elderly. Kate recently launched her Shaping Us campaign, which focuses on early years and raising awareness on the first 5 years of life. But this time she's been learning how those at the end of their lives are being supported at the Oxford House nursing home in Slough. The care provided includes supporting the elderly to live independently in their own homes. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB Plus radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel, where Emily Carver is today, sitting in for Dewbs & Co.
Yes, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. So, with me until 7 is my panel. I have Emma Burnell, who is a political consultant, and Toby Young, who is the director of the Free Speech Union, with me this evening. Now, as ever, I want to know your thoughts throughout the show. Please do get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the address, or on Twitter @gbnews or @Carver Emily. Now, it all has a familiar whiff to it, doesn't it? A traditional Christian candidate puts themselves forward for the role of a leader of a modern political party, immediately gets torpedoed by their religious beliefs on things like same-sex marriage. This time it's the prospective leader of the Scottish National Party, Kate Forbes, who says she wouldn't have backed gay marriage when it was passed by the Scottish Parliament. This prompted several of her key backers to turn against her, and the media essentially appears to be launching somewhat of a campaign against her, constantly asking her about her personal Christian beliefs. Toby, is it possible in this day and age for a practicing Christian who holds true to, well, the teachings of the Bible to be a leader of a mainstream political party?
Well, it's evidently very difficult. I think Jacob Rees-Mogg had a reasonably good career, may yet have an even more glittering career in the Conservative Party, in spite of being a practicing Orthodox Christian. But it's hard to imagine someone being a Christian, having Orthodox Christian views and thriving in any other mainstream political party, including, I think, the SNP. But I think if you're a unionist, that's good news, because I think she's far and away the strongest candidate. And I think that the embrace of kind of full-on wokery-pokery by the SNP is proving to be an electoral liability, as we saw with Nicola Sturgeon's resignation. And if they don't row back on the gender recognition reform bill, if they do bring in a conversion therapy ban, if they continue to prosecute these deeply unpopular, extreme woke policies, then they're going to damage the cause of independence. And as a unionist, that's a great thing. So I hope Humza wins.
It would have been easier, wouldn't it, Emma, for Kate Forbes to bite her tongue and say nothing, really.
Actually, that's not the advice I'd have given her as a consultant. I think she's probably done the right thing. If you look at what happened with Tim Farron, he really struggled because he wouldn't answer the question. Kate Forbes has at least said, these are my views, take them or leave them, and she stayed in the race. It's up to voters now how they decide, and not the whole voters of Scotland, but the voters within the SNP, whether they decide whether for them that's a disqualifying thing or not. So I think she's actually done right in getting ahead of the story. I don't agree with her views on most of these things. We may overlap in our views on gender and sex, but from very different opposing poles of perspective. But on gay marriage, things like I find those views completely anathema to what I believe, but completely anathema to what I believe is not the same. And being able to publicly criticise those views is not the same as saying she has no right to hold them as part of being in public office. I always believe that we should have these fights in public, because if we don't, we have them in private badly.
Well, the reaction makes it almost... Well, for Christians living in this country, and in Scotland, of course, most importantly, it must feel like they are under attack. The way that this woman, her views are being, well, amplified in the media. She's not allowed to escape these questions now. How do you feel Christians in this country react to this type of thing?
Well, I imagine they'll be pretty unhappy about it. I mean, it shows, just how successful the kind of secular, progressive elite has been, that now in this country you can be a practising Hindu and no problem become Prime Minister. You can be a Muslim like Humza Yousaf, her rival in this contest, doesn't matter. But if you're a practising Christian, then you're more or less excluded from participating in public life. Do you think that's true?
Do you think we treat Christians differently to other religions?
No, I don't think that's specifically true. I think there is a vast mainstream of Christian belief. I grew up in the church. I'm not a practising Christian anymore, but I grew up in a really liberal church. My first vicar was the man who buried Terence Higgins, for example. So the views that I hold on social issues were not anathema to the Christianity in which I was raised. So I think that we need to not necessarily conflate Christianity with the particular views held by some Christians. And I think it would be damaging to the faith itself to say that everybody who is Christian also believes this specific form of Christianity.
You may be surprised, Emma, by how little tolerance there is, even for quite mainstream Christian beliefs now. So I'm actually appearing as an expert witness in the trial of an evangelical street preacher in a couple of weeks' time. He was prosecuted because he misgendered a trans person who was essentially taunting him when he was preaching and demanding that he use her preferred gender pronouns. He refused to do so because that was contrary to his Christian beliefs, and he was arrested and charged with a public order offence and convicted. So this is his appeal that I'm testifying in. So, you may think that some mainstream views, such as thinking that sex is binary and immutable, which we associate with Christianity and other religions, are acceptable, but you can be arrested now for saying that in some cities in England.
I agree that that's ridiculous. What I want to separate is all Christians believe X from you can't be Christian in public to a sense. I mean, I would not be prosecuting things like that. I think it's crazy. I often say lots of things that we say the police should deal with, we should deal with socially rather than legally. But I don't think that means that you can't be a practising Christian in politics. I mean, Wes Streeting speaks really eloquently about his Christianity, his faith, also his sexuality and how he struggled to marry the two. But he got through that journey and is, no one can say that Wes Streeting is not a successful frontline politician.
Yeah, I think crucially one of the things that made me so frustrated about this story is that she keeps saying that her religious beliefs will have no impact on legislation. She's not going to start rolling back on gay rights. She's not going to ban gay marriage. She's not going to do any of these things. So why then is it so relevant and so necessary for the media, in my view, to hound her on this?
Because it's not just about your actions. It's
This is the purity of thinking test I was talking about.
It's what's in your heart. I mean, the people that are condemning her and now think she cannot possibly lead the SNP because her views are so antediluvian and old-fashioned and horrific. They're people who demand a purity of soul. They want ideological conformity with their dogma, and if you don't, then you're ruled out.
Now, Rakib Hassan, who's often on the channel, he's a social policy analyst, he tweeted something just recently saying she's defending her Christian values and traditional beliefs with grace and courtesy in the face of what I can only describe as secular liberal bigotry.
I mean, I think it's perfectly acceptable to ask a politician about their beliefs, about what drives them, about their backstory, all of those things. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It will be up to the SNP and their activists whether they feel that that disqualifies her or not. I think the part of the issue is that the SNP, all political parties are quite broad churches, let's face it. But the SNP really is very, very broad because they have people who are on the economic right, people on the economic left, social conservatives, social liberals. The one thing they all agree on is independence. And that has led for a very long time to them not having a conversation about all of these other issues. So it was always going to explode into their dialogue with each other as soon as, Nicola Sturgeon stepping down so quickly meant it a lot more explosive because there wasn't an obvious next person. It wasn't quite clear who was going to take over the way it was when Nicola took over from Alex Salmond. So I think the reason it's being so hotly debated is that they are having a conversation as a party about who they are and what they believe. And who they are and what they believe beyond that Scotland should be independent has never really been settled.
Well, lots of you have been getting in touch at home. John says, awful, punished for being a Christian and having Christian beliefs, people punished for praying silently in public. What has this country become? Edward says, absolutely first-class introduction tonight regarding Kate Forbes. Thank you very much. I hope she wins simply because she's clearly an honest politician and there aren't many of them around nowadays. Now, that, I think, is an important point. She's just being honest, and politicians don't do that very often. Humza Yousaf, for example, he says he's signed up to absolutely all of this woke stuff, whether it's gender self-identification. He's also said he's completely signed up to gay marriage and all of that. I wonder if he's a practising Muslim as well. I imagine he probably takes a bit of heat from his own community on that one.
Yeah, and I imagine he's not being completely transparent about what he actually believes and thinks about that issue.
Well, we don't know, but...
We don't know. But, yeah, I do think she will get points for being honest, for being forthright, and I think Emma's right. I would have given her the same advice. And, had she concealed what she really believes about gay marriage and become the leader, and there'd then been a row about it because people had uncovered evidence that she was opposed to gay marriage at the time, then it might blow up. And that would be far worse than it blowing up now.
Also, maybe if she does stay in the race, I'm not sure how long the race itself is, but she could have got this out of the way and then move on to more important policy issues, not least independence, which is the whole point of the SNP itself. Kath says she has been totally honest about her own views and emphasised her views would not influence the democratic vote. It's an absolute disgrace that she's now being bullied. John says Scotland was always a country with high Christian morals. Not anymore. So it seems like most of you that are getting in touch very much back Kate Forbes for essentially, well, admitting to what she believes and holding true to her own beliefs in the face of lots of criticism. Anyway, coming up, a new era of make, do and mend. Could we actually be about to bring back World War II-style rationing to save the planet?
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. Now, a lot of you have been getting in touch, huge numbers of you actually. Neil says, I do not agree with gay marriage or anything connected to it, so should I be cancelled? Everyone has a view whether you like the answer or not. Well, you are in a minority. The vast majority of people do support gay marriage now, but no, I do not think that you should be cancelled. This, of course, is all relating to Kate Forbes, who is one of the contenders in the SNP leadership race. She's been hauled over the coals, essentially, over her religious beliefs, asked about her stance towards gay marriage, gender self-identification, and lots of other things. Kids, having children out of wedlock, all of that has been coming up. Joe says, most of British society were brought up with Christian values, therefore it shouldn't be punished for promoting them. It's what has made us a tolerant society. Well, I think a lot of the younger generation haven't been brought up with Christian values that much, but a lot of people have. And I think they should be allowed to express their views, even if some people don't like them. Chris says, Kate Forbes, again, is entitled to her views and entitled to voice them, so Keir Starmer could take lessons in honestly expressing his true beliefs from her. Yes, I do think a lot of us look at our politicians, cookie-cutter politicians, and actually wonder, what do they actually believe? It seems like they change their views depending on which way the wind blows, and also what's the Liberal consensus of the day, the new consensus of the day. Anyway, moving on. Could we be in for another era of make, do and mend? It's a different kind of war this time, the war on climate change. Scientists at Leeds University say government should consider rationing petrol, household energy and meat in order to reduce our carbon emissions. Emma, when you see stories like this, do you think climate scientists are getting a bit above their station?
I mean, academics going to academic, to be honest, and it's absolutely right that people put interesting ideas out into the world and test them. I was watching the News Hour where supermarkets are rationing food at the moment, and this is largely as a result of bad weather. As climate change continues and gets worse and worse, that is going to get worse and worse. We're going to get rationing, whether it's done by governments or whether it's done by nature.
We can get ahead of the game by rationing ourselves.
I mean, I don't support rationing on individuals in this manner because I think it has the ways that we need to mitigate climate change and adapt need to happen much further up the food chain. I think we need to be changing the ways that we run things rather than the individual choices made and imposing those individual choices. So I would put far more emphasis.
So basically, until Shell, BP, McDonald's get their act together and cut their carbon emissions, we should just
until we
sit
make
back
them
and
get
relax
their
and
act together.
Take as many long-haul flights as we like.
Until we make them get their act together, basically.
Okay.
I think it's got to be a partnership, and we are literally all on this planet together. So let's try and work together in ways that don't. And I just feel like this would hurt the poorest hardest, who are also going to be hurt hardest by climate change. So I think that we need to find ways to mitigate climate change that actually don't smack those people on the sharpest end about.
Well, I mean, this might seem a bit of a niche story to some, Toby, but these kind of demands are coming left, right and centre. This isn't just one researcher saying this. Lots of serious people and climate scientists, climate journalists have been talking about this for years.
Yeah, I mean, we see the risk of climate catastrophe being invoked over and over as a reason to restrict our liberty, whether it's 15-minute cities, whether it's net zero, the phasing out of petrol and diesel-driven cars in 2030, and now, apparently, rationing meat and petrol. And, you know, as someone who believes in freedom, I'm very suspicious about these apocalyptic scenarios constantly being conjured up as a reason to kind of rein in our liberty. And actually, a lot of the climate predictions of catastrophe are based on climate models. Computer models. They're scenarios generated by computer models. And we saw, I think, during the pandemic, how unreliable those computer models can be. And we see these apocalyptic predictions. You only have to look back a little way into the past to find apocalyptic predictions which haven't come true. I mean, Prince Charles predicted, he said we had 8 years left to save the planet. That was 14 years ago.
Our great monarch.
Our great monarch. I think Gordon Brown said in 2009 we had 50 days left to save the planet.
Why do people do this? Is it about control, then, in your view?
I think it is about control. I think it suits a kind of Puritan, top-down, controlling agenda. They don't like to see people enjoying themselves in their motor cars, eating beef on a Sunday. They don't like the sight of the proles rolling around happily, enjoying themselves, consuming, flying on cheap package holidays to Marbella and Ibiza. They want everyone to be reined in. They want a kind of greyer, joyless universe in which they're the only people in charge.
Do you think that's true? Do you think the politicians are looking at us and thinking, oh, we want to take away some of that fun?
No, genuinely no. I mean, it makes for good copy.
I think Nicola Sturgeon does.
Sure.
Nicola Sturgeon doesn't appear to be the most joyful person always, necessarily, but that's her own individual choice. Exactly. I mean, I think there is... things go in and out of fashion as technology develops. We didn't ban horses, we developed beyond them to the motor car. We're not going to ban motor cars, we're going to develop beyond them to electric cars, to mass transit vehicles, all the sorts of wonderful things that are going to come. I think we need to be really conscious of... you're talking about catastrophising whilst catastrophising about the catastrophisers, and it just all feels...
That's a good point, actually. Are you catastrophising about the state of our politicians catastrophising?
I'm not catastrophising about the catastrophisers. I'm pointing out that the catastrophisers are constantly making these predictions and raising the alarm about things, and none of it ever comes true. They're constantly crying wolf. Arctic sea ice is increasing. The polar bear population is growing. The ozone layer, the holes have all been fixed. Forests are growing and expanding. All of those predictions of what would happen if we didn't immediately stop eating meat and stop driving cars haven't come true. And as for electric cars, Emma, you evidently don't drive an electric car, because if you did, you'd know by now that they are an unqualified disaster.
The original motor car was not as good as the ones we've got now. This is what I'm saying.
Innovation not
moves us on, exactly. And that's exactly where I really want to see us moving into a zero-carbon world, but a world in zero carbon where we have more freedom, where we have the ability, where the technology enables us rather than detracts from us.
I worry that with the current crop of politicians we have, that perhaps a little bit of authoritarianism might come with it.
I think you're catastrophising, Emily.
And I'm catastrophising. I wonder if we reframe this to get some people on board at home with the idea of rationing for climate change. Perhaps you think at home that people have got too greedy, and that actually, apparently we've got a comment about this. Maurice says, not a bad idea. It would do wonders towards combating the obesity crisis. Well, so perhaps we're all eating too much, we're spending too much on going on, planes across the road. Perhaps we should rein it in for moral reasons, have a more earthy experience of life. I don't know. Perhaps that's one way of looking at it. Gordon says, I don't think I can take much more of these scientists. What next? Rationing breathing. Well, we were worried about cows and their flatulence and things like that being bad for the ozone layer, so...
Why'd you look at me when you said that?
I thought you might have a view.
I think there is one serious point about this, which is if we introduce rationing, then inevitably a black market will follow. And that will exacerbate inequality. It'll mean only people who can afford to pay black market prices can get hold of petrol or can get hold of more than their, weekly allowance of meat. And we don't want to live in that kind of society.
Well, if you have read Ross Clarke's satirical novel about climate change, it ends up being that things like flights are very much rationed, and the climate campaigners are allowed as many flights as they like because they're doing good for the world,
right.
Which is very good. It also reminds one of Animal Farm, perhaps. Clem says, why us again expected to save the planet? We should be telling these scientists to take a running jump and just go away, or perhaps just solve climate change. They could do that. Perhaps, instead of telling us what to do.
There's plenty of solutions out there. There's lots of great work being done. I'm privileged to work with climate change movements all around the world, working with them on their strategy. Very few of them are saying, don't eat that, don't do that. They're saying they're working with communities, actually. Most of the groups I work with work on a community level to really just do things like local food growing. The small changes that just make such a lovely, positive difference to people's lives.
Well, I think everyone should be pro that sort of thing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with growing your own fruits and vegetables.
I do it myself.
Although my parents tried to do that in their London garden, and they were told by my siblings that actually the soil would be too polluting and that their fruit and veg would actually not be very nice, but I don't know too much about growing my own fruits and veg. Perhaps people at home know more than me. Anyway, coming up, could jets be the next item of Western weaponry en route to Ukraine? Boris Johnson and Liz Truss think so, and are urging Rishi Sunak to send them. Is now the time to ramp up support?
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dewbs and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Yes, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. Now we'll reintroduce my wonderful panel. Emma Burnell is a political consultant and Toby Young is the director of the Free Speech Union. Now, new polling from Opinion shows British people are overwhelmingly positive about how the UK has reacted to the conflict in Ukraine. Does that mean we should keep up our wholesale support and even, as Boris Johnson and Liz Truss are suggesting today, send more fighter jets? Is this the time? Is this the moment to ramp up military support, Emma?
I don't know about ramping up military support, but I have been absolutely won over from a sort of nervous support to a full-throated one. I genuinely do believe that this is existential now. And if, as I do, believe fully in Western values, I think that this has to be the red line that we no longer cross. I think it is that fundamental. I think if Putin is allowed to win this, then we lose the 21st century in terms of fighting for those values, and those values are very important to me.
Well, that's true, isn't it, Toby? Ukraine is on the front line now, but this is a war that could have massive repercussions for the rest of Europe, our country too.
Yeah, I mean, one of the arguments against sending jets to the Ukraine is it'll be an escalation.
Yes.
It could lead to an escalation of hostilities. But we ought to bear in mind, too, that if we don't provide aid to Ukraine, then Russia could, in the end, win this war, and that, in turn, will lead to an escalation as well, because Putin's not going to stop at Ukraine. Yeah. I mean, the big argument against sending jets to Ukraine is that it may prompt Putin to go nuclear. You know, it may bring a nuclear war
well, he's
one
already
step
saying
closer.
that he's back to testing
He's
nuclear.
constantly rattling that sabre. But I'm not sure that we should, stay our hands because of fear of what he might do. I mean, the Poles have already sent MiG-29, so a NATO member has already effectively crossed that red line, and, Putin didn't retaliate by nuking Kiev. There are other arguments too. I mean, yeah, he might use tactical nukes. They probably wouldn't give him a huge advantage in this particular war. And let's not forget that mutually assured destruction will still apply even if we do send fighter jets to the Ukraine. So there'll still be a really good reason why, Putin isn't going to respond by unleashing intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Well, I wonder, Emma, what people at home are thinking, because they see today Jeremy Hunt has got a bit of fiscal room. He's taken in more taxes than he was expecting. And many people might see it as a bit of an either-or in terms of does that extra money go towards more military aid to help Ukraine fight back against Putin, or could it go to NHS or education or cutting taxes?
I mean, I don't think it has to be an either-or. There was planned spending to go to Ukraine anyway, so they've already said that they would match at least what's already been given and maybe increase.
Yes, we had. Sorry, just to clarify, we gave 2.3 billion last year in military aid to Ukraine. Rishi Sunak has said he wants to meet that or exceed it this year.
And I think the British people have been fantastic on this, actually. And I think they agree with me that this is about, yes, it feels like a war that may be quite far away, but it also feels like a war that could be a lot closer, and closer in terms of what we're fighting for and why. And I think when you think about the British story and the things that we are so proud of and the way that we stood up during the Second World War is something that is absolutely intrinsic to the way that we see ourselves. I do think this feels similar.
But how far? There has to be some kind of line, doesn't there? Because we can say we want to do everything we can, but obviously that has limits, doesn't it? If we said that we're 100 billion, would that be too much?
Well,
if it meant that we were closer to defeating Putin?
I don't know. I'm not a military strategist.
Yes, well, fair enough.
I think that we're not going. It seems clear to me we're not going to send troops in. That I think is the line.
Well, I don't know, because we did say we weren't going to send tanks. Now jets is very much on the table, it seems. So who knows?
It doesn't feel like that's an option that the British are considering at all at the moment, nor are the Ukraine asking us to. As I said, I just think this is so much more important than a simple territorial battle. It is a battle of ideals. Ukraine looked to the West, and that's what drove Putin mad. And I think that as a Westerner who really values the freedoms and the values
essentially
that
you're saying
have,
this is our fight.
It is our
fight.
fight.
But Toby, would you pay extra taxes? If it came down to it, would you pay extra taxes to help Ukraine fight this war?
Well, I hope that Rishi Sunak takes it from the overseas development budget.
Oh, well, there you go.
And if we're going to spend money on overseas countries, better we spend it in Ukraine than give it to China. I mean, I think you're right to flag up that there is this risk of a kind of ratchet effect. We gave $2.3 billion last year. We're going to have to exceed that this year and then exceed this year's expenditure next year. But I think the hope is that if we do give another $2.3 billion in aid and equipment to Ukraine this year, then other countries will step up.
But do we have to be the second largest military donor?
It's not sure. Do we have to be? We are proud to be.
But yes, but I sometimes feel like we pretend that our country is still the richest in the world, and sometimes I feel like we give more than we actually have.
Maybe you've been listening too closely to these declinist narratives, Emily. We still are one of the richest countries in the world. We're the 5th largest military power. We have a seat on the UN Security Council. We're a founding member of NATO. Maybe we do have more responsibility than other countries.
Well, good point. Peter doesn't agree, though. He says the UK should not continue pushing us towards World War III. The war in Ukraine is a proxy war engineered by America. Well, I don't agree with that one, but the sentiment is there that some people do think that this is heading towards a major escalation. Archie says, takes a very different view. We have to give Ukraine what they need to defeat Russia. We can't let Russia win. It would lead to World War III if they win in Ukraine. They won't stop there. So people are saying, on the one hand, that it could lead to World War III if we up our military support, and then on the other hand, if we don't, it could lead to World War III. So people take a very, very different view on this. Richard says all efforts should be in the direction of talks, not war. However unlikely those talks seem right now, more weapons is not going to end. Well, Richard, you sound like Jeremy Corbyn. That's what he always used to say about any type of intervention, any type of war or military support that we were giving to a country. Deborah says we should back off. We have helped enough. I do think there is a strong, perhaps a minority, if you believe the polls, but a strong minority who take that view that you know, help starts at home, charity starts at home and whatnot. But I do think this is much bigger than that. And Joe says we couldn't send any of our aircraft. We haven't even got enough to use on our aircraft carriers. So forget it. Well, that's a good point too. Do we actually have enough military, enough weapons, enough tanks, enough jets to be able to send them over without completely depleting our own resources? Anyway, we must end on that now. But coming up, does dressing down make you more trustworthy? The BBC thinks so. One of its executives told staff it's fine if they look sweaty and dirty. Stay tuned.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Emily Carver, and with me until 7, my panel, Emma Burnell, political consultant, and Toby Young, director of the Free Speech Union. Now, let's get some of your responses, mainly on Ukraine, the question of whether we should be ramping up support. Bear in mind, last year, we spent $2.3 billion on military support for Ukraine. Rishi Sunak has said we will meet that or exceed that this year. Bernard says, he's written to me and said, the sooner the better. All European countries and UK, USA should have gone in with Ukraine in the beginning. The war would have been over in months. Perhaps that's true if there had been more of a united force. Remember, Germany was very slow to act, starting off with only a few helmets, if I remember correctly. Joan says, let the EU sort out the Ukraine and Russia. They're on the EU's borders, not ours. And Bernard says the back-off brigade will soon change their minds when Putin is just across the channel. Good point. It could come far closer to us if we're not careful or if we don't do enough. Now, moving on to a bit of an odd one, but I think it's relevant. What are the hallmarks of a trustworthy person? Are they punctuality, keeping their word, backing up what they say? No, according to the BBC, it is dressing down. One of the corporation's executives is reported to have told staff, including on-air reporters, they should feel free to be as sweaty and dirty as when we're in the field. It is more trustworthy than if we look like we've just stepped out of an awards ceremony. Is looking scruffy the way to build back trust in the Beeb? Toby?
Yeah, I feel that the BBC has done so much to damage trust in the BBC because of its incredibly one-sided reporting about the government's pandemic response, essentially just trotting out whatever line Downing Street issued that week. And it'll take more than reporters mussing up their hair to restore that trust. So I'm not convinced by this. And I'm not a big fan of the dress down trend. I mean, I know I'm not wearing a jacket or a tie, but, it came in with Tony Blair, not wearing ties in government, a kind of more casual look. And I think that actually harmed the credibility and the authority of Number 10 Downing Street and the government as it then was. I liked it when John Major was always quite smartly turned out.
Is it a sign of decline?
I don't think it's a sign of decline. I think it's a sign of the times.
Which may be declining.
I mean, you guys are so negative. You're always talking this country down.
I do it with a smile on my face.
I think that, I'm not quite old enough, although I feel it at times, particularly today, to remember newsreaders wearing tuxedos. But that was a thing that happened, and then they went to ties. Now, I'm not saying they should be, feet on the desk, cigarette in hand, wearing their band T-shirt or whatever. And I often think sometimes this debate gets really weirdly caught up in other debates around class and completely misappropriated. The idea is that, it makes you look more working class.
Well, is this what the BBC are trying to do?
And honestly, it's actually mostly the working class who say, no, you wear a suit to an important occasion, and middle-class people who dress down. And I've always found that the more influential a person I was talking to, the more they felt they could do the casual shirt sleeves thing. I mean, just look at 2 Prime Ministers ago, the scruffiest man in Britain. And he deliberately so. He would mess up his hair every time before he went on the telly. And he was not considered by many to be the most trustworthy.
Well, is this just a case of sort of trying to dumb down things for people they don't feel like they're reaching?
Yeah, it feels a bit like that. A bit patronising and a bit like, you're earning 7 figures, you're a household name, you're in the, sidebar of shame in the Daily Mail each week, but let's pretend you're just an ordinary person, so look all sweaty and maybe you'll fool a few people.
I mean, it's quite funny, to be fair, because I do believe at GB News, some of the presenters were not wearing ties. And I think there was a rule imposed near the start of GB News, if I may say this, that they should wear a tie. They're presenting the news. But not for the female presenters. They were all looking lovely, of course, and looking very, very, very smart. But I think ties were well, encouraged, if not made I find ties
such
necessary.
an odd item of clothing, just as a random aside. Like, what are they for?
What are
What's
they
the
for,
point
Toby?
of a tie, Toby?
I'm not sure exactly what the origins of the tie are. There
It
must be
just
some
seems such a weird,
explanation.
extraneous thing to do. Why don't you hang a noose around your neck
Emma,
all day, every day?
in you're very, you've got high standards. Do you like a man in a tie, or do you prefer a man without a tie?
Eventually, without anything, but or maybe just a tie. That can be fun too. It depends on the scenario. If I'm going out for a nice posh dinner to a nice posh restaurant, then I will dress appropriately, and I would hope that the person I'm going to dinner will do the same. If we're slobbing around the house and they're wearing a suit and tie, I would feel really uncomfortable and weird.
Yes, that would make you feel uncomfortable. I guess when it comes to the BBC, if you're reporting from a field, you probably should, or a war zone, you probably don't look very trustworthy if you are wearing a suit and tie, because that's simply not what you would wear in that certain scenario. But I think in general, asking reporters to dress down because it's more trustworthy to do so is ever so slightly patronising to their audiences. People are getting in touch. You're getting in touch from home. Philip says, I care not what they wear on the BBC. I don't watch it and don't want to fund it. Well, quite. You are watching GB News and not BBC for a reason. John says, I hate this idea. I detest the way people dress down now to go to the theatre, etc. Standards, darling, every time.
Yeah, the odd thing about this advice is it's saying, you've got a trust problem as a reporter. So in order to become more trustworthy, in order to have the viewer believe what you're saying, pretend that you're really sweaty and casual. It's like, it's like engage in an act of deception if you want to earn the trust of viewers. No.
Yeah.
Just say what you believe to be true. That's what earns the trust of viewers.
It's not like it's Clarkson's farm, Jeremy Clarkson's farm, where he would look ridiculous if he was wearing a tie and suit, because that wouldn't be fitting for the, for the role that he's playing.
No, absolutely. Again, it just comes back to being... I think one of the things that's important is to be comfortable. I think sometimes we are asked to wear things that make us feel uncomfortable, and that immediately does slightly restrict your movement. And sometimes
but it's fashion, Emma, Yeah. People have to,
Mate, I'm turning 48 tomorrow. Fashion's left me long behind.
It's quite interesting what's coming in. People are really broadening out this conversation. Margaret has said teachers lost respect by dressing down. It's terrible. And I do agree with that, actually. If you go to some schools and you walk into some classrooms, the teachers really are dressed like slobs. Now, that might be cruel of me to say. But you've set up a school, have you not?
Yeah.
And did you insist that teachers dress properly?
I think we do have a rule that we expect the teachers to be dressed formally. And I think it does set a good example, and I think it does enhance their authority. And like you, when I see a teacher in kind of tracky bums and a T-shirt, I do slightly
What if they're
recoil.
the games teacher?
Yeah, well, I guess
that's
it's okay.
appropriate dress, isn't it? And that's very different. That's very different. Anyway, Carol says, doesn't matter if they dressed scruffy or not, they are untrustworthy either way. And that's the crucial point, really. Perhaps the BBC should think about other ways to make themselves more trustworthy with the public, perhaps by being a little less biased in some of their news reporting. That would be a good start, in my view. Anyway, that's all that we've got time for this evening. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to my panel, Toby Young and Emma Burnell, with me since 6 o'clock. Nigel Farage is coming up at the top of the hour, so stay tuned for that.
Good evening, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest weather forecast from the Met Office. It's been quite a mild start to the week, but it's all change as we go into Wednesday as colder air makes its way in from the northwest. This is all due to a low pressure system just to the south of Iceland that's bringing a cold front southeastwards across the UK throughout tonight and into Wednesday morning. So this will be a band of cloud with some rain in it as well, quite heavy across Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England for a time tonight. Ahead of that, they'll be mostly dry, though quite cloudy, so temperatures here will still be remaining mild for one last night, really. Though behind that, clearing skies will allow temperatures to drop, so we could just see a touch of grass frost here to start Wednesday. That cold front will make its way sporadically southeastwards through Wednesday, bringing quite patchy rain throughout the day and cloudy skies, particularly across East Anglia and southeast England for much of the day. Behind this, though, skies will clear, allowing for plenty of sunshine, but also some scattered showers that could be wintry over high ground. Now, as we go into Wednesday evening, that rain will start to clear away from the southeast, though it may linger for a time, and it will still be quite cloudy here as well overnight. Though behind that, skies will clear once again as we go into Thursday, so another patchy frost around, particularly across Wales, Northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and we could see some icy stretches on roads and pavements, particularly for Scotland and Northern England. As we go into the start of Thursday, it will be another cloudy start across the far southeast with some rain still lingering. But for elsewhere, there'll be plenty of sunshine to start the day, though rain will start to make its way in across northern Scotland, bringing some strong winds too. So it's quite an unsettled start to the outlook, but becoming increasingly dry by the weekend with temperatures around average.